There's a plant growing right now, probably within a mile of wherever you're sitting, that a landscaping crew somewhere is being paid to destroy this week. They'll call it a weed, they'll call it invasive, they'll say it's taking over, and they'll be tearing out one of the most productive native plants on the entire continent. This isn't a rare orchid hidden in some far-off forest. It grows on highway shoulders. It grows in abandoned parking lots, on railroad embankments, on the ugliest, driest, most forgotten scraps of land in America. Nobody planted it, nobody waters it, and that's exactly why nobody respects it. But here's what almost no one realizes. That scruffy roadside shrub is feeding more than 300 species of birds through the deadliest months of winter. It's holding entire hillsides together by the roots, and those deep red cones on top. They carry the exact same flavor as a spice that sells for real money at the grocery store. We have spent a century treating this plant like garbage. Today we're going to find out why, and why almost everything that reputation is built on turns out to be wrong. Welcome back to the Root Vault. Let's start with the plant itself, because you already know it, even if you don't know its name. It's called Staghorn sumac. And once you can picture it, you'll start seeing it absolutely everywhere. If you've ever spotted a striking shrub or small tree with fuzzy branches and cone-shaped clusters of deep red berries along a roadway or hillside, you've likely encountered Staghorn sumac. The name comes from the branches. The young stems are covered in fine, velvety hair, which gives the plant its name, because it resembles the velvet on a deer's antlers. Run your hand along a young branch and it feels exactly like that. Soft, fuzzy, alive. In summer, the leaves are long and feathery and give the whole plant an almost tropical look. And then autumn arrives and it puts on one of the best shows in the plant kingdom. Its autumn foliage can blaze in shades of scarlet, orange, and maroon, rivaling even the finest maples. You've seen it from a moving car, that streak of impossible red along the interstate. That's usually this. Now here's the setup for our whole story. Staghorn sumac colonizes disturbed, nutrient-poor, well-drained soils, roadsides, abandoned fields, rocky outcrops, railroad embankments, and forest edges. It tolerates drought, compaction, and low pH, but it wilts quickly if its roots sit in standing water. Think about what that means. This plant deliberately chooses the worst real estate available. The baked gravel, the eroded slope, the abandoned lot where nothing else will grow. And instead of being celebrated for that, it gets punished for it, because a plant that shows up uninvited on marginal land and spreads gets a very specific label in the human mind. Weed. So let's deal with that word head on, because it's the first thing people say when they reach for the saw. It's invasive, it spreads, it takes over. Here's the problem. In its native range across eastern North America, Staghorn sumac is not invasive at all. It's the opposite. It's a native that belongs here. The confusion comes from how it grows. Staghorn sumac has shallow, spreading roots that send up suckers, forming colonies or naturalized thickets. One plant becomes a stand becomes a thicket, and to a homeowner watching it march across the back corner of the yard, that looks like an invasion. But that suckering habit, the exact thing people hate, is one of the plant's superpowers. Its extensive root system stabilizes soil and prevents erosion, making it a key species for restoration and slope plantings. In fact, Staghorn sumac is used for mass planting on dry slopes for erosion control and fall color, and it's one of the most ecologically productive native shrubs in eastern North America. Read that again. The plant people bulldoze off their property is a plant that land managers deliberately install to hold the earth in place. If you're standing on dry soil, compacted clay, gravel, or a sunny slope, that's exactly where this plant does its most important work. There's even a strange twist here. A 2024 study on the phenolic compounds in Staghorn sumac found that the plant contains high levels of compounds like flavonoids and organic acids that showed strong inhibition of seed germination in test plants. This suggests Staghorn sumac may influence surrounding vegetation and could have potential applications in natural weed control. So the weed may actually contain its own natural weed-suppressing chemistry. The irony writes itself. The plant isn't the problem. The word is. Weed isn't a scientific category. It's just a human opinion about a plant in the wrong place. And we've been wrong about where this one belongs. Now let's get to the part that should genuinely change how you see this plant. Because while people are cutting it down, an entire ecosystem is depending on it. Look at those red cones again, the ones that look like fuzzy crimson torches. Botanists call them drupes, and they're not just decoration. The upright, cone-shaped fruit clusters ripen to dark red by late summer and persist through winter, serving as a critical food source for birds and small mammals during the lean winter months. That word, persist, is the whole point. Most fruit is gone by October. Berries get eaten, they rot, they fall. But sumac cones stay standing on the branch through ice, through snow, through the coldest stretch of the year. These persistent fruit clusters remain on the plant throughout the winter, providing a critical food source for birds and small mammals during periods of scarcity. So when January hits and the landscape is stripped bare and everything else is buried, the sumac is still up there holding a full pantry. And the guest list is staggering. These high-tannin fruits feed over 300 species of songbirds, as well as game birds like quail and turkey. Let me name a few so this stops being an abstraction. American robins, eastern bluebirds, northern mockingbirds, cedar waxwings, yellow-rumped warblers, downy and hairy woodpeckers, ruffed grouse, ring-necked pheasants and wild turkeys all consume sumac fruits. But it's not just a winter cafeteria. This plant works every season. Butterflies and other pollinators benefit from the small, nectar-rich flowers in spring. It's a larval host plant for both the Luna moth and the spring azure butterfly, and it attracts pollinators, making it an excellent addition to a wildlife or woodland garden. And the dense colonies formed by its root suckers, the same suckers people hate, offer excellent nesting and cover habitat for birds and small mammals. So put the whole picture together. In spring, it feeds the bees and hosts the caterpillars. In summer, it's a nursery and a shelter. In fall, it lights up the roadside. And in the dead of winter, when the world has nothing left to give, it's the last diner in town with the lights still on. Now, the homeowner with the saw. Every time one of these stands comes down, all of that goes with it. People mistake Staghorn sumac for something dangerous and remove it from pollinator gardens or erosion control slopes, depriving local ecosystems of a bird-attracting native species. It's not just losing a shrub, it's evicting 300 species from a building they didn't know was occupied. At this point, you might be wondering, if this plant is so useful, where did the fear even come from? Why does the average person flinch at the word? One word, sumac, because there is a genuinely dangerous plant that shares half of this plant's name, poison sumac. And that plant is no joke. Poison sumac is a highly toxic wetland shrub that causes severe allergic contact dermatitis in over 80% of people. The fear isn't invented, it's just badly aimed. Here's the thing people get wrong. These two plants aren't even close relatives. They just got saddled with the same nickname. Poison sumac is actually more closely related to poison ivy than it is to staghorn sumac, despite the shared common name. They belong to entirely different genera, Toxicodendron versus Rhus, and their bodies tell the story of that split. Toxicodendron species evolved urushiol oil as a chemical weapon. Rhus species evolved tannins and organic acids that deter animals without triggering human reactions. One plant went the poison route, the other went the pantry route. They just happen to wear the same last name. But here's the honest part. The confession. There's a reason this confusion sticks, and it's not that people are foolish. The confusion persists because both plants share superficial similarities. Compound leaves with multiple leaflets arranged along a central stem, an upright growth habit, and dense clusters of small fruits. To a glance at 40 miles an hour from a car window, sure, they can rhyme. The good news is that up close they couldn't be more different, and the single easiest tell is the one thing you can check without ever touching the plant: where it's standing. So let's make you unable to ever confuse these two again. And I want to be clear about the order here, because most people do this backwards. Never begin identification by examining the leaves. Start with where the plant grows. That is the single most predictive factor and the easiest to assess without close contact. Here's the rule. Poison sumac thrives only in saturated, acidic soils, freshwater swamps, peat bogs, floodplain forests, and the edges of slow-moving streams. It cannot survive in well-drained upland sites. Its feet have to be wet, always. Which leads to the most freeing sentence in this entire video. If you're standing on dry soil, gravel, or a sunny slope, and you see a sumac-like shrub, it is not poison sumac. Period. The roadside plant, the parking lot plant, the dry hillside plant, habitat alone has already cleared it. But let's stack a second check on top, because it's just as easy. Look at the berries. Edible sumac species always bear dense, upright fruit clusters covered in fine, velvety, reddish hair. Poison sumac lacks that velvety coating, and its fruit clusters are white or greenish-white, loose, and droop downward from the branches. Red, upright, fuzzy like a torch pointing at the sky, versus white, drooping, smooth, hanging down like sad little grapes. That's not a subtle difference, that's night and day. And if you want a third check for total certainty, feel the stem, but only on the dry ground, red berry plant you've already cleared. Staghorn sumac stems are densely covered in fine, velvety, rust-coloured hairs, especially on new growth. If you see dense, rust-coloured hairs on a sumac-like shrub in a dry field, stop, it's Staghorn sumac. Poison sumac stems, by contrast, are smooth and hairless. So here's your entire test in one breath. Dry ground, red cones standing up, fuzzy stems, safe and useful. Wet swamp, white berries drooping down, smooth stems, leave it alone. If the fruit is red and stands upright, it's edible. If the fruit is white and hangs down, it's poison sumac and must be avoided. That's it. That's the whole thing generations were never taught. 10 seconds, no contact required, and the confusion is gone forever. Now that you know it's safe, let's talk about what you've actually been throwing away, because this is where it stops being a story about birds and becomes a story about your own kitchen. Those red cones aren't just bird food. Sumac berries are high in malic acid, and vitamin C are tart and tangy like sour lemon, and make a wonderful wild substitute for lemon in cooking. The flavour lives in a coating on the outside of the fruit, and it's the same tartness you may have already tasted without knowing it. Because here's the punchline. These berries have long been used in the Middle East as a spice, and they're a great way to add tangy flavour to foods like hummus, salads, pasta, and meat marinades, that deep red powder dusted over flatbread and grilled meats and rice all across the Mediterranean. That's ground sumac. And the flavour isn't just similar to the jar you'd buy, and it's genuinely interchangeable. Dried and ground sumac is one of the most useful forage spices, and the flavour is the same as the Middle Eastern sumac you'll find in jars at the spice shop. So picture the full absurdity. A person drives to the store and pays a premium for a tiny imported jar of red powder, and then drives home and cuts down the shrub in the corner of the yard that makes the exact same thing for free. From a time perspective, it's much easier to just buy sumac from the store, but harvesting your own forces you to pay attention to the place you're in and the rhythm of the seasons. And it isn't only about flavour. This plant carried people through hard times when there was no store to drive to. Staghorn sumac has been used by Indigenous peoples, including the Dakota and Ojibwe, for centuries. Its berries are an important source of vitamin C, and were often used in teas to prevent illness. It's a notable source of vitamin C, which is part of why it was traditionally used for sore throats, pairing naturally with other forage sources of vitamin C through the cold months. One important honesty note before anyone runs outside. Because Staghorn sumac is in the same plant family as cashews and mangoes, people with cashew or mango allergies should approach it carefully, since rare cross-reactions are possible. If you've reacted to those before, taste a very small amount first. For everyone else, the door is wide open. So let's say I've convinced you there's a dry ground, red cone, fuzzy stemmed stand near you and you want to try it. Here's how to do it without wrecking it. First, timing. The best time to harvest is late summer through early fall, typically August into September when the clusters are fully red. And the single most important rule, collect on dry days because rain washes away the sour flavor. A hard rain literally rinses the tart coating right off the fruit. Give it a few dry days first. Want to know if a particular stand is any good before you commit? There's a forager's trick. Lick your finger, rub it on the surface of the berries and lick your finger again. The flavor should be noticeably tart or sour. If it's flat, move to another cluster or wait for a drier stretch. Now the drink, the famous one, it could not be simpler. The beverage is made by soaking the drupes in cool water, rubbing them to extract the essence, straining through a cloth or coffee filter and sweetening with honey, maple syrup or raw sugar. Break a few cones apart into a jar, cover with cool water and let them sit. And here is the one mistake that ruins more batches than anything else. The seeds contain bitter compounds that are pulled out by hot water, so it's important to only use cold water when making the infusion. Cold water is critical. Hot water extracts bitter, astringent flavors and will produce a harsh drink instead of the bright lemonade you're aiming for. Never boil it. Cold steep only. That's the difference between something magical and something you pour down the sink. For the spice, it's just as easy once the cones are dry. Dry the clusters completely, then pulse them in a grinder or blender for about 30 seconds to break up the red velvet, and sift the result through a fine mesh sieve to separate the powder from the harder seeds and stems. What falls through the sieve is your homemade jar of that expensive spice. And please, one last thing, this is the whole moral of the video, so don't skip it. Sustainable harvesting means taking only a portion of the clusters and leaving many for the wildlife that rely on the fruit as a food source, particularly in winter. Take a few cones for yourself, leave the rest for the 300 species that were counting on that plant long before you showed up. So let's go back to that landscaping crew, the one being paid to tear this weed out of a hillside. The plant they're destroying holds the soil so it doesn't wash into the storm drain. It feeds the birds that will still be alive in February because of it. It hosts the caterpillars that become moths. And on top of all of that, almost as an afterthought, it makes a free tart drink loaded with vitamin C. And a spice people happily pay for by the ounce. It does 5 jobs. It asks for nothing. It grows in the places we've given up on. And its only real crime was showing up uninvited and being generous about it. We called it a weed because it was common. We called it dangerous because it shared half a name with a plant in a swamp. And we never once stopped to ask what it was actually doing out there on the edge of every dry lot in the country. Now you know. So the next time you're driving past a bank of those brilliant red cones standing tall along a dry roadside, you won't see a weed anymore. You'll see one of the hardest working plants on the continent, quietly doing its job, exactly where nobody thought to look. If this changed the way you see the weeds in your own world, subscribe and stay close to the Root Vault. There's a whole continent of forgotten, useful, overlooked plants still out there, and the next one is already waiting for you right here.